Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, the Syrian rebel group that has taken over Syria in the last month, has a complicated and troubled past. Its leader Abu Mohammed al-Jolani was born in 1982 in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, to parents from the Golan Heights in Syria. Politics and activism are in his family's past, for his father was an Arab nationalist and his great-grandfather fought the French occupation of Syria. His family had fled after falling foul of the Assad regime. In 1989, however, his family moved back to Syria and settled into a Damascus suburb. Some of his friends and classmates from his childhood described him as shy, introverted, and avoiding attention, but also as manipulatively intelligent. He became interested in politics and international affairs in 2000 when the Second Palestinian Intifada occurred. When 9/11 happened a year later in New York City, he became further radicalized and left Syria for Iraq to join the newly created terrorist jihadist group, Al-Qaeda, in Iraq. During the Iraq War, he quickly rose through the ranks and became a close confidant of its leader, Abu Musab al-Zarqawi. In 2006, he was captured by American forces and served time in the infamous prison, Abu Ghraib. In 2011, when America was pulling back from Iraq, al-Jolani was released, and almost immediately after, Syria imploded into civil war as part of the Arab Spring protests and riots. He then joined back up with his comrades and was sent to Syria on a mission to form an Al-Qaeda branch there for the war. He partnered up with the infamous future head of ISIS, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. Together they formed Jabhat al-Nusra, Al-Qaeda's Syrian branch. However, over time they had a falling out, and al-Jolani increasingly tried to take his group in a Syrian nationalist direction. In 2012, his organization was labeled as a terrorist organization by the US, which bolstered it further, becoming one of the most powerful groups opposing Assad's rule. His base of operations became Idlib in the northwest of the country. For the next 5 years, his militant group carried out suicide bombings and other attacks against Syria's religious minorities, such as the Druze and the Alawites. He also orchestrated several attacks in Damascus that killed many Syrian police officers and soldiers. He even went over the border in Lebanon and carried out several bombings that targeted and killed mainly civilians and officials in the Iranian embassy there. Meanwhile, he also began to provide social governmental services to civilians living in the territory he controlled. He gained the ire and wrath of ISIS leader al-Baghdadi when he began to cooperate with non-terrorist jihadist rebels. Al-Baghdadi attempted to take over his group, but al-Jolani avoided this by swearing allegiance to the head of Al-Qaeda himself, Ayman al-Zawahiri. In protest, al-Baghdadi broke off and went on his own to form ISIS. In response to this, Ayman al-Zawahiri, the official leader of Al-Qaeda worldwide, severed all ties with al-Baghdadi. Throughout 2014 and 2015, al-Nusra and ISIS warred with each other, giving Assad's army a reprieve. ISIS gained the upper hand and conquered most of the land that al-Nusra had taken from Assad. When the US entered the war and began bombing ISIS, al-Jolani surprisingly condemned it. He made statements along the lines of he didn't need help from the Crusaders in his fight with al-Baghdadi. As the war proceeded, al-Jolani led his group back to prominence and restarted their war against Assad and ISIS in earnest. He also made remarks that his true enemy was not the West, but was Assad, Iran, Hezbollah, and ISIS. When Russia intervened in the conflict on Assad's side in October 2015, he called for attacks on Russian civilians and on Alawite areas in retaliation for the Russians mostly killing Sunnis with their airstrikes. Being beaten back by the Russians, al-Jolani then attempted to make peace with and merge with other non-jihadist rebel groups. However, they were hesitant about his affiliation with Al-Qaeda, and so on July 28, 2016, al-Jolani officially announced his organization's severing of all relations with Al-Qaeda. To mark the occasion, he renamed his group to Jabhat Fateh al-Sham. When the Syrian civil war ground to a stalemate in 2018, al-Jolani settled down in Idlib province and began to conspire to merge all rebel groups there under his command. He defeated the ISIS and al-Qaeda supporters in the province and rebranded his group as Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or HTS for short. He then formed an effective civilian government in Idlib that built new houses, shopping malls, schools, and provided more electricity to its people than what people had access to in Damascus. Despite his success, the Turks who had supported him grew wary and began to limit their aid to him. He attempted to take back areas in northern Syria that had fallen under Turkish control, but was unsuccessful. In late November 2024, al-Jolani led his men in an offensive against the Syrian army, which saw Assad's soldiers swept one by one from the cities of Aleppo, Hama, Homs, and Damascus itself. The Assad family regime and chokehold over Syria, which had lasted for over 50 years, was over. He has since declared that Syria's historic diversity is a source of strength and has pledged no attacks on Alawites, Druze, and Christians. He also pardoned those men who were conscripts in Assad's army. In response to some positive steps taken by him, the United States on December 20th even removed their terrorist designation of him and the $10 million reward on his head. Despite sweeping away the hated Assad dictatorship, he still has challenges facing him, for Israel has invaded and taken the Golan Heights in the south. The Turks and their proxy group, the Syrian National Army, are still in the north fighting the Kurds, whom al-Jolani has bad relations with both. Plus, the Americans still occupy the much-needed oil fields in the east of the country, which likely was one of the economic factors that led to Assad's collapse.